All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So glad that you are here today to join us for, I guess this is our kickoff session for INFOcon. Um, this first session is Dr. David Charles from the University of Illinois, Urbana, Champaign, and he's going to speak on the art of leading data analytics teams. Uh, Real quick, I'll just say my name's Katrina Hagler. I'm the Director of Recruitment and Admissions for the iSchool at Illinois. We also have Tara Batt online. We're going to be helping out David in the chat box. And with that, I'll let you take it away, David.
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, for whatever time zone you are hailing from. We are glad that you are here and investing some time in learning a little bit about the future of information science and for INFOcon 2024. So I've been asked to talk a little bit about the art of leading data analytics teams, and so I will just jump right into it. So what I want to talk about today is really a genesis of some professional experiences and scholarly experiences. And I like to think about it as, this code to canvas. What are the things that I wish I had known when I was leading analytics teams? So many of you are here, I'd imagine, the mixed audience, right? Some of you are considering schools, some of you are currently maybe in programs, some of you are faculty or staff at many of the different iSchools all across the country. And so one of the things I wanted to start with is sharing with you a little bit about the iSchool here at Illinois, the different programs we have. So there's a wide range of bachelor's, master's, and doctoral programs, along with different certificates of study and licensure if you are interested in doing a licensure for school librarianship. One of the things that's really amazing about, I think, about the School of Information Science here is we have such a broad and diverse set of faculty and staff, bringing many, many different disciplines, many different perspectives into our school. And it's something that I greatly, greatly appreciate. And I learn so much from our students, from our staff, and from our faculty. And so just highly encourage you to give us a look as you are considering programs. You have a myriad of choices. And so just wanted to make you aware of that. Of course, please feel free to reach out to Katrina or anyone else in the chat to learn a little bit more about the School of Information Sciences. So a little bit about me and what I teach related to this. So there are several classes that I teach, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. I teach an information consulting course, and so that's really focused on problem solving, critical thinking, and really trying to take apart very ambiguous, complex problems. Very similar as the name implies, it's consulting. You have a client, maybe you have a boss, maybe you have a peer in a sister group, sister team, brother team, and they come to you with a problem or a question. And so this class really helps you take that apart and use data to help answer that question. Next class I teach is a competitive intelligence and knowledge management. And so you're probably wondering, well, why might that be useful? Well, in any situation, so for example, if you are looking for a job, who are the competitive applicants? How might I find out about that? How competitive is a position? How do I manage that knowledge? Well, this class is really about that type of work. If you think of it from a business application, if you work for a specific organization, who are the direct competitors to that organization? How might you find information out about those competitors, and where would you store it? How frequently would you refresh it? Who might you disseminate that knowledge to? That's what that class is about. One of the things I'm really excited and I think really exemplifies the breadth of knowledge that comes with working and being part of the school at the iSchool at Illinois is a new class that I'm starting in the spring, and I've named it Change Catalyst, Adapt or Perish. And the genesis of this class actually came from some folks like you, so prospective students, industry partners, current students, our faculty, and we realize that the world that we're dealing with is constantly in change. But one of the things that isn't often taught, or it's just a snippet in one maybe class or one slide, is how do you think about change? How do you prepare yourself for it? And how might you influence that in whatever respective organization that you work in? And so we're launching this new class, and so we're really excited about it. And so just wanted to make you aware that in addition to the breadth of faculty, we're really trying to stay on top of the times. And this is, again, part of that future of information sciences. Like, how do you stay abreast of that? So where I'd like to begin is kind of setting the context for what we're dealing with. Okay. And as you're looking at this cartoon here, right, it reads, is it really an innovative approach? Oh, sorry, this is a really innovative approach, but I'm afraid we can't consider it. It's never been done before. And so to me, this exemplifies a lot of what we're dealing with in the world in dealing with data science. How are you advancing it within a given organization? Some people may call it innovative, some people may be scared of it. And so really the genesis of this is what is it that I believe, and some of the research and my experience has shared with me, what what do we need to know? Like, what are some of those skills that might need to be in place? And so I always like to start with a quote because I find that that kind of level sets the mindset. One of the first things around leadership that you'll find it is it's a very reflective task, right? How are you showing up for the people you're working with? How are you showing up for the people that work for you? And how are you showing up for the stakeholders all across the organization, perhaps that you work with? And so, big fan of William Pollard. And so, it is the responsibility of leadership to provide opportunity and the responsibility of individuals to contribute. So the basis of this conversation I want to have with you is opportunity and contribution. What are those skills to enable opportunity and contribution? So what does this look like, right? What is this art of leading data analytics teams? And so I've kind of coined this phrasing, this code to canvas, the brushstrokes of leadership. You can have fun with it, and I'd imagine you could probably throw it in ChatGPT and have a good time with it. But I was really trying to think about, okay, what is it that would be really useful in knowing what are some of those skills that are required? We can call them leadership skills. We could just call them general skills. But what are some things to really be aware of? Okay, so I've laid it out here. First is self-awareness and job awareness. Being self-aware and understanding the job context that you're in are some things that lead to those brushstrokes in the transition of code to Canvas. Second is, are you understanding the organizational and team dynamics, right? So the organization operates and has a culture, and your team operates and has a culture. And are you really understanding what that means and how it influences your leadership and how it influences how you run your data analytics team? And then finally, I'm calling it communication and influence. How you communicate your ideas and how you influence various stakeholders are going to be pretty critical in how you are going to be successful in leading data analytics teams. So that's what we'll talk about today. So let's jump right into it. So the first question I would have for you, and you'll find, as I shared with you before, that leadership is a reflective exercise. What are your leadership tendencies, right? Take a moment to think about it. So many of the research breaks it down into kind of three areas. There's technical leadership skills, there's human leadership skills, and conceptual leadership skills. So as the name probably suggests, technical leadership skills is having a knowledge about a specific topic or activity. Very often in data science, it is someone who demonstrated leadership potential and got promoted, okay? And so you're going from being perhaps an expert or a principal data scientist now to running a team, maybe a team of your peers, now working with people in different ways. And so think about for a moment, what is your tendency? Do you tend to think about your work more in a technical perspective? Or do you think about it from a human perspective, right? Having knowledge about being able to work with people. How do you work with people? Do you listen to people? Are you able to talk to them? Are you geeking out with them, or are you having a different kind of conversation with them? And then lastly, conceptual. This, as it's described here, is this mental work of shaping meaning within your organization, whether there are issues, whether it's the culture, whether it's putting together a mission and policies. These are the broad conceptual skills that are also going to be critical as you grow in your leadership. Again, it's very often that you'll lean technical. I know I did when I was first promoted. And so I would invite you to think about, what is your tendency, right? What just kind of gut check right now. What do you lean more human in your actions, even though you may have technical skills? Do you enjoy more conceptual work and think about those types of leadership skills, or do you just want to geek out? All of them are fine. But why I call them tendencies is because it's not that one is right or wrong. It's just really being aware of what your tendency is. Do you prefer technical? Do you lean more human? And do you lean more conceptual? Why is this important? Well, I'm going to imagine that if you're leading a data science team, perhaps maybe you don't want to stop there, right? I would imagine that you want to grow in your organization, whether you want to become middle management or you want to become the chief data officer or the chief analytics officer, perhaps for your organization. Well, why this matters is these mix of skills are going to vary as you ascend to different levels of leadership. And as always, you need to make sure that you're thinking about developing these skills and what it looks like at various levels. So as you can see the chart here, in an early supervisory position, your technical and human skills are pretty prominent, right? Where your conceptual skills may not need to be as strong, and or you may not be doing that type of leadership work. As you rise to middle management, think about it as you have multiple teams you're supervising, and each of the direct reports you have is a manager of those smaller teams. There's a even balance here of technical, human, and conceptual. Why? Because very often you're working with senior leadership, and you're working more in that conceptual space. To get things done, you still need those human skills, and to give appropriate direction to your leadership team, right? So the people that report into you, you still need to have strong technical skills. And as you rise further, right, your technical skills become less and your human and conceptual skills become more important. How are you setting the vision? What are some of the policies you're setting in place as you establish, your data programs? How are you developing the leaders that are beneath you, right? So again, think about this from a skills perspective. Again, tendencies, right? I call them tendencies. It's not bad or good. Think about that for yourself. So how do you do that? Well, there are tons out there. I'm sure each of you has heard at least of maybe Myers-Briggs. There's Insights Discovery. There's tons and tons and tons of assessments out there. Okay, the way I would frame it, that you would take a look at this, is just becoming more aware of what your tendencies are, how you react, and what strengths and skills might be needed as you ascend into these higher roles. Okay. Now, what you see here is an assessment that I actually recently became aware of in the last 3 months. It's called Principles U. The main thing being free. If you are students that are considering school, or maybe undergrads right now considering going to graduate school, I'd imagine maybe you don't want to invest in a very expensive assessment tool. And so this might be something for you to consider. Again, it's free, and again, it's around awareness of what your tendencies are and how might that influence your leadership as you ascend to these leadership roles. So just giving you a sense of what the output might look like. It's grouped into different areas, right? And so those areas can, again, give you a sense for how you might show up, give it a little bit more detail than just being technical, human, or conceptual, it really gives you a sense for what's important to you. What are your additional tendencies? How might you react to stress? Okay, so I get no money for promoting Principles U, just to be aware, just so we're clear. I've just found it is very helpful in some work that I have done in prior lives, as well as work that I do now at the university. So something to check out. So now let's talk a little bit about management versus leadership, right? There's a lot of definition around what this is and what is it that I need to strengthen. And so the name management, or the word management, and the word leadership can often get tossed around. Okay? And so what are these management activities versus leadership activities? So some of the things that you'll need to learn as a new member supervising or leading a team of data scientists or data analytics is planning and budgeting, right? I remember learning all about accounting and whether this is a capital expenditure, because maybe you're making an investment in a data analytics system. How might you organize your staff? What kind of headcount you have? See, these are all things that I would put in that bucket of management activities, okay? On the flip side, there's leadership. Okay. This leadership is really around what's the direction you want to set with your team? What's the direction you want to share more broadly? How are you motivating and inspiring your team? And then aligning with all of your stakeholders across the organization. While they are both essential and they might have some overlap, I wanted to create that distinction because, again, think about the skills maybe that you have experience. Maybe you had a role as an individual contributor that you did some organizing and planning of staff, right? Maybe you did some planning of your projects, right? Maybe you have a project management certificate and this is something that you're already familiar with. Well, think about then the flip side of how have you established direction? What might that look like? How are you communicating ideas? So just making that distinction. This is all part of being self-aware and understanding what your job actually is as a leader. Because very often there's a lot of invisible tasks and asks that you're being expected to take care of. So while I could talk about this probably for hours on end, and I would love to, I'm going to get down to the heart of it. Okay, the job of you leading a data science team is to drive business value. Okay, like full stop. You need to drive business value. Otherwise, why does your team exist? And so what I like to think about it is understanding why analytics projects fail can give you more of insight and outlook into what might you need to be. So solving the wrong problem, right? So that could be around communication skills, conceptual skills. How are you talking with your stakeholders, maybe your boss, maybe other peer teams across the organization? How are you really getting to what that problem is? Misconceptions about data science. The main thing I would take away here is how are you educating people in what data science can do and what data science can't do? What I like to say is, how are you taking people on their journey of self-discovery? So while you may be leading a data analytics team, think of yourself also as an educator. How are you educating the people that you're working with so that they can work with you? The next thing, not demonstrating business value. If you can't translate what you're doing into business value, that's a problem. And so think about that business mindset that you have on your head and think about your organization. Do you understand how your company makes money? If you don't, learn how it makes money. Whether it's a nonprofit and there's a philanthropy arm, or this is a for-profit and you're selling a product or services, make sure you're really clear about how your company makes money so you can translate that into the value that your team provides. Of course, there are concerns about quality, surfacing that. Again, there's an education process that goes along with that. Sometimes I hear that data quality like halts teams. Leaders don't want to hear that. what's really important is how you showcase where the challenges are and what can be done or can be done with that data science data. Okay, back to the misconceptions. One that probably will hit many of your hearts is the pursuit of perfect statistical models, right? This is how we're trained. We want to make sure that the R squared is high as possible. And the reality is, in a lot of business context, it's okay for it not to be perfect because you want directional answers, right? Directional answers actually will create a lot of money for our company. And so being careful not to get hung up on that. So maybe that is a coach to your team who there's a data scientist who really wants that perfect statistical model, and that's actually not needed. So how are you working with that person on your team to understand where to stop and when to re-engage with you? Overconfident analysts and wrong talent. We'll talk about this a little later, but of how you evaluate what your needs are and what the talent needs within your organization are going to be pretty critical. And of course, how you're communicating with people, which I will touch on a little bit later, but that is really, really, really critical in sharing your ideas across an organization. So as you can see here, your job may not just be isn't really just to lead. There's a lot of other invisible work that's required for your success. So how to be more self-aware and job-aware. One, strengthen more than your technical skills. I know I had a bias toward my technical skills, and it took a lot of energy and coaching from my bosses and doing a lot of assessments to figure out what my tendencies were. Where did I get stressed? Did I overmanage things when I was stressed out about whether something was going to work or not? Understanding your leadership style. So that assessment I shared with you, consider taking that principles use assessment, or if your organization offers you other assessments, consider taking those. And then finally, as I started with this section, leadership is a lot about self-reflection. And so think about and reflect on your beliefs and values, and more importantly, your biases that might influence your decision-making as a leader for your team, and maybe some of the recommendations that you make to your peers or the person you're working for. So now that we've learned a little bit about being self-aware and the job you're dealing with, let's touch on a little bit about organizational dynamics and team dynamics. Because one of the things that I learned on my journey in leading data science teams is I didn't realize, holy cow, there's so much that really influences how my team should function in that success that I didn't take in consideration. So I'll share a little bit about that with you. Again, I like to start the section with great quotes, and this is one by Steve Jobs. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. Never forget that. There is always, always, always people that you'll need to work with in order to advance what you want to have, the goals for your team or success for yourself individually. So why consider data science team from an org perspective? Well, as I shared with you before, there are many, many invisible influences, let's call them, that really dictate how your team might be organized, maybe even before you took over the team, that you really want to take some time to think about how to kind of suss that out. And so how might you do that? I like to think about it from an org model perspective. I spent a lot of time thinking about different types of organizational models. And what I didn't realize is how much knowledge was actually built into looking at your respective organization. So for those of you listening, take a moment to think about how you're structured. Who do you report up into? Is your boss in a functional group, or is it part of the corporate headquarters? Who is your reporting line up all the way into your CEO? What you see on the screen here are 6 different types of organizational models that are common in data analytics teams. And I'll talk through each of them very briefly. So over here on the left, this is a functional model. And the reason it's called functional is because the analytics group or the team that you'll be leading reports up into a function. To make a distinction here between function and business unit, think of the business unit as a unit that produces profit, right? So this leader has P&L responsibility, where the function is, I would call, indirect revenue generating. So an example of that would be a leader that's responsible for a specific product. So are you responsible for an app? Are you responsible for a platform that's being used? Are there services that you provide in a consulting situation versus a function, for example, like marketing or maybe HR or IT? That would be a function. So those are functions that assist the business unit, enabling make the organization work. Okay. And so as the image here indicates, right, this dotted line, you're working with this business unit on different projects. Okay. Centralized. So a centralized group, I mean, it reports directly into the main corporate headquarters. And so the analytic group, you can think about it as a direct report perhaps to a chief data analytics officer. So all of the analytical talent within a given company reports into this kind of corporate office. Federated. Federated is a mix. Okay, there might be some teams that report up into this corporate office, but there are also analytics groups throughout an organization. So there might be an analytics group, for example, that works in, I worked at John Deere at one point, and so maybe there's an analytics group that works in the tractor business. Maybe there's an analytics group that works in the construction business. And there are also analytics groups that work in the functions. So maybe there's a marketing analytics group. Maybe there's an HR analytics group. And maybe there's also a centralized corporate analytics group, right? And so that's what's federated. That's what it means by federated. You're working all across the organization. So on the bottom here, consulting, as the name indicates, this is a centralized group that consults with other business groups across the organization, okay? Thus the dotted lines. So decentralized, the big difference between the centralized and federated in particular, centralized, is that there isn't a way for all the teams to come together, okay? And they operate in disparate ways. And then finally, there is a center of excellence, right? And so in lieu of an analytics team, this is where maybe the analytic processes are decided upon, maybe the tools that are used, and that then is shared with the analytics groups within a business unit and or function. Why does this matter? Okay. Where you sit it's really important to understand that and how to communicate up to your leadership. So if you're in a functional line, you may need to communicate differently with your leadership versus being in a business unit, which has profit and loss, P&L responsibility. Okay. If you work in corporate, you may need to communicate with your leaders differently because of the level that that leader is being asked to operate and dictate. Okay. And so being aware of that is really going to influence, one, how you communicate, and then two, who might you need on your team. So for example, if you are centralized, are there data scientists that work in an analytic group that maybe you don't need on your team, and you may need more people that have a little bit more business knowledge related to the business unit that you work in or the function that you work in that can translate some of the more technical data analytics work to more of the business analytic or your business related and communication related type work. So it's just something to think about. So I'd encourage you to think about, what does your org structure look like? Do you have an analytics team or have you worked on one? Where does your team sit? Do you sit in a function or do you sit in a business unit that has P&L responsibility? How has your boss asked you to communicate or maybe put some slides together to communicate some of the work that you're doing? So there's many, many things to think about. So this is a way to start to think about your organizational dynamics. So how can we be more aware? First, be familiar with your organization's mission, vision, and strategic goals. Like, what's really important? What is your CEO or the presidents of your organization talking about? How do you get more familiar with that? Do you need to talk to your direct manager, supervisor, or boss to understand a little bit more about what that looks like? The next thing, make sure you're aligning your team's work with the organizational priorities. So what is the organizational priority in your function? How might that organizational priority relate to the business function? So if you work in a HR organization and you run a analytics team in HR, how might your work impact what the business goals are in that business unit for someone who has profit and loss responsibility? How are you helping them make money, and how do you talk about it that way? Are there different skills you might need on your team, given what you know about that? Who are the stakeholders you have to work with, right? So very often I'd imagine you may work with an IT team to get access to different data. Maybe there are some teams in the business unit that are in charge of doing analysis or doing any kind of business analysis to support the business itself. What do they need? Are they hoarding data? Very often, I have seen that sometimes business units want to protect their data at all costs. And so what do you need to understand about that? Do you understand why it's so sensitive? And what are the decision-making processes do you get access to, and how are you going to influence and get information about that? And then, of course, lastly, informal networks, right? As you saw on the prior slide, there's these formal networks that are related to being centralized, and there are informal networks. One of the shockers that I had in my career was work that was being done in other parts of the organization that I didn't know. And it wasn't until a peer on another team introduced me to a peer on another team that I didn't even know existed, that I was starting to able to understand who are the broader set of stakeholders and decision makers that we had to work with in order to drive our team's success. And then lastly, think about your organizational culture. If you work at a company that is digitally enabled, there might be some more things that you may have leeway to do versus a more mature company where you may need to go a little bit slower and more deliberate. So again, just some things to think about. So now let's transition to talking about team for a moment. Again, I would love to talk about teams for hours and hours on end, but I want to give you some critical things to think about when you think about your team performance. And if you're a new leader to an analytics team, or if you are taking over a team and you need to think about and analyze how is a team performing within the organizational context. So two big things lead to team performance. First, team culture. So this is how your team members interact with each other. The second is your team productivity. And this is how efficiently and effectively your team actually gets work done. And together, that leads to team performance. So team culture, you may think about things like trust and safety, right? How are you psychologically safe? Are they able to bring ideas to you that may seem a little avant-garde, but you know what? With a little tweaking, could work. Are they cohesive? Do they talk to each other? Is there a shared sense of commitment and belonging to the team itself? So for example, some teams will work on internal, can't think of the word at the moment, hackathons, right? Internal hackathons. So how are you having your team come together? Some leaders like to take their team out for drinks or lunch, but how are you creating that shared sense of belonging would be an example there. And then team productivity. Before we talked about an understanding of your organization, does your team understand what the purpose of their work is? Is it connected? Are you helping them connect their work to the broader organization or some of the priorities and goals of your senior leadership team? What's expected around execution? Is there a set of stopgaps that you have? Are there a set of project management tools that you use to manage the execution and monitor it? How are you interacting with your given stakeholders? One example might be if you are managing a set of reports and you get requests that come in. How are you protecting your team's time so they can actually get the work done versus just responding to requests? That would be just, again, one example. So how might you diagnose your team given these two cultures? Well, there's a 4x4. I worked as a consultant in a prior life, and so I love, sorry, the 2x2 for aspects here. And so each of these produces a type of team, okay? And as you take a moment to take a look at the slide here, is your team driven? Driven team is a more focused on productivity and lacks team culture. Is your team frozen, where you don't have a team culture and you don't have team productivity, right? So nothing's happening and you don't want to be around each other, right? Are you stuck? Are you more comfortable, meaning you have strong team culture, but low productivity, right? So you have a good time together, but you're really actually not getting anything done. You got to be careful about these things because your leadership wants to know about the business value you're producing. And so knowing and being able to diagnose how your team is functioning, or maybe there are ebbs and flows in the project lifecycle where your team might go from one box to another, is going to be really important for you to know what you might do to course correct. No surprise, a high performing team has a high team culture and high team productivity. And so just something to be aware of. Another great tool for diagnosis here. So how do you be more aware? All right. Again, align your team's work with the organizational priorities to maximize the impact. Again, make sure you're thinking about the different stakeholders and the decision makers along the way. For example, there might be a IT person, a senior leader in IT, that while may look like has a decision to allow you to access to some data, in reality, it might be a subordinate of that person's that could influence whether you get access to some data or not. So just understand where that sits within your organization. And then lastly, culture and productivity make a high-performing team. How are you thinking about your team's culture? And how are you thinking about the productivity of your team? All right, so where are we at in this journey? We've talked about self-awareness and job awareness. So do you understand yourself and reflecting? Do you understand the job you're in? Do you understand now the organization that you're in, whether it is a function or is it a business unit? Are you working in a centralized corporate unit? And assessing your team and how they're functioning. Now let's talk about communication and influence, right? How might that be helpful in driving success and leading your data analytics team? Again, I like to lead with a quote because again, it's a wonderful level set for me in how to think about this topic. And so this is from Peter Drucker. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. I would emphasize what isn't said. So what's been helpful in communication and making sure that you're able to influence? So whether you're sending an email, whether you're sending a slide over, a deck, a PowerPoint presentation, or some other type of communication, it's really important that you can make your reader or your consumer of your content easily consumed, right? It's taking that person on that journey of self-discovery. Think about where they are on that continuum. Do they really understand data science, or is maybe the email the beginning of the conversation? Very often in email communication, it's really going to be important to highlight the key action point and then repeat it in different levels of data. I call it high skim value because you want to be able to target different audiences who want different information at different levels. Okay, so if you're sending an email, for example, do you write a long paragraph with a lot of technical detail? Or are you writing a one-liner and then make a note and say, hey, if you want more information, maybe look at that attachment. The other thing is making sure that you repeat what your action point is. Do you want them to do something? Well, make that noted in the email. Make it noted in the headline and make it also noted in maybe that attachment and where you want them to look, right? Lowering the cognitive load, if you will, on how they need to consume what you're sharing with them will help you be more effective. Now, very often, the primary means of communication as a leader and in different meetings is often either written, in PowerPoint form, or it's spoken. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So here is an approach that can be helpful as you think about building a PowerPoint presentation that I find is really necessary when it comes to data analytic work. Okay, so it's a story, right? People remember stories versus the mounds and mounds and mounds of data you're going to throw at them. So think about what that story is. Is your story going to be created through an inductive approach because of different ideas of maybe what you've learned in different analyses? Or is it more of a deductive approach in how you think of your main message and correlated ideas? Now, I highlight this for you because you're going to probably have work happening on different teams or with different data scientists or analysts on your teams. And part of your job is to bring that message together in a story that's going to be easily consumed and resonate with your leader. So how do you do that? Okay. This is a technique that I learned in consulting and continues to serve me daily. And so wanted to share that with you. So the first part of it is writing out your so what's, right? What are you trying to say to your client, to your stakeholder, to your boss? Write it out on a piece of paper, right? It could be, we explored this data set. We learned that the customer doesn't like these things, but prefers these other things. We're recommending we pursue blank based on the data and the analysis that we did. Once you do that, put those on the top of your slides and then use the data that you have. Think about different charts that you can get out of Python or maybe in PowerPoint you want to create, but think about a chart that's supported, okay? It's very easy to get lost in the message, right? Because you're really excited about the data. You've maybe worked on it for weeks on end. And one of the things that can get very frustrating is you've worked on something and tried something 6 ways from Sunday, and it was just, magical genius in code. And it shows up as 2 bullets that are maybe each 5 words long on one PowerPoint slide. And so you really want the person you're presenting to appreciate that genius. Assume that they appreciate your work and get to the point of what they need to know and what's going to be critical moving you toward your business goals. Okay. So again, this straw man concept, write out your so what's, right? What's the key thing you want them to know? What's your story? So whether 3 sentences, 5 sentences, 10 sentences, try and write that out. And then you can put it into some slides, and then you can figure out a chart that highlights what you want that person to know. It keeps you on track. It'll also help you know if you have any gaps. And it also eases the burden on the person that's reading it because they can read the headlines. Even if they don't understand your charts, it makes it easier for them to consume. Here's another technique that I came up with that the genesis of this was people misusing the slides. So those great slides I just shared with you about what's the headline, what's the cool chart. Well, part of the value that's helpful with that is your slides don't get misused. So that so what at the top is the inference or the interpretation that you're making based on the data. If you just show the chart, it's possible that if that slide is used in another situation or another presentation, it could be misused. And so as a data analytics team leader, I think of PowerPoint development or communication strategies in PowerPoint with 3 different layers. The first layer is in the middle, right? This is your PowerPoint presentation. This is the original thing that you were trying to build, okay? The second part of it is the appendix. The person you're presenting to may have questions. Sometimes these questions can come from individual contributors or individual contributors from other teams. So you need to be prepared for that, right? Be thinking about maybe what questions that may come up. The most important part here is this 1 pager in the beginning. This may sound rudimentary, but it was a game changer in how I was able to be more effective in communication and other students that I've worked with, clients, and other professional circumstances outside of the high school. Having the one pager does a couple of things. One, it forces you to simplify what you need them to know, what you did, why it's important, and how to take action. Okay? They don't need to read the rest of the content. This is the one pager. Okay? You can think of it as an executive summary. Okay? So very often, this might be a place that your leader, your boss, or other peers may just want to spend the entire time talking about because it's easy for them to consume. Then your presentation just becomes supporting documentation. If you prepare all three of these, you can be basically assured that you have content that can span both out to sister teams that you want to present to, down to individual contributors, and most importantly, up to influence key stakeholders to get buy-in and who are key decision makers. The other thing that had a surprising benefit is it was easier for my boss to share my team's work with that one pager. So if your boss or your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss goes to a meeting, you have now already created a communication tool for them to share your work, what the impact is, and what value that they can get out of saying yes or investing in some work you want to do. How does your boss prepare? Well, you've got the rest of your presentation, okay? And so it may take a little bit more work and develop this communication strategy for different audiences, but I've found that it reduces mismessaging. It makes it easier for your boss and peers of your boss's level to share information, and it makes it easier for you to take questions with the appendix as you anticipate what questions may come up. So this was an absolute game changer for me, and hopefully it's a game changer for you as you think about leading teams. Because again, very often, this middle one here is where your focus is in. But I would encourage you to think about the appendix, and I would also think about that one pager. So think about managing up, managing out, and managing down. All right, so how do you communicate and influence? So think about adjusting language and tone when you're actually talking with the stakeholders that you're in communication with. Think about what that also looks like, maybe in email communication, as I shared earlier. Do you need like one-liners with additional documentation so you can take people on their journey of self-discovery and stage it to a point where they can consume what they can handle? It's really important that effective communication foster alignment. So you're able to make sure that your team's work is clear and is not misinterpreted by ensuring that all audiences are addressed in that one communication packet that you're putting together. And then at the end of the day, you don't want to be in the room, right? There might be some conversations that you might be privy to, right? Some of that invisible work and some invisible conversations. Make your work easily be shared. And so by following this strategy, that can be helpful. All right, that was a lot, I know. Again, I would love to talk about this topic more, but let's kind of summarize here and review what we've talked about today. So what is the art of leading data analytics team? This code to Canvas journey. Number one, be self-aware and job-aware. So perhaps take an assessment to learn your tendencies. I like to call them tendencies, right? Whether it's Myers-Briggs, Principal U, Insights Discovery, it doesn't matter what it is. Use that as a tool to be more self-aware of what your tendencies are and how you think about your skills and how you interact with people. Second, understand the invisible work of your job. There's a lot of things that are not going to show up on that leadership. For example, your job as an educator. Your part of your job of leading a data analytics team is taking your stakeholders and peers on their journey of self-discovery. Some peers are not going to know anything. Some peers are going to be super advanced and may have a master's or a PhD in statistics. And your job is to know how to take those people on their journey of self-discovery. Number two, organizational and team dynamics. Make sure you align your team with organizational priorities. Understand the difference between reporting into a business unit that may have P&L responsibilities, so profit and loss, or functional, which might be a cost center. That could influence how you organize your team, the culture in which you're operating in, and how you think about producing and focusing your work. When you think about your respective team, think about the culture and productivity. Are you building a new team? How might you reinforce your culture, and how might you think about building productivity? If you're taking over a team, how might you assess its current culture and productivity, and how might you make changes? How do those things align back to the organizational culture? Are you working in a very mature organization that may be hundreds of years old, or are you working with a digital native that maybe is only 10 years old? And then lastly, number 3, communication and influence. Always tailor your communication to your audience. While it may sound simple, it is actually very hard to do. In fact, writing a shorter email tends to be harder than writing a longer email. Remember who you're sending it to. Make it easy on them. Second, make sure when you put together PowerPoint communications, make sure that you're thinking about managing up, managing out, and managing down. Make it easy on your boss, or how your work is being shared by your boss or your boss's boss. And also make sure it's easy to be shared out and down. If you create a packet that's contained, it takes a lot less work on you when your boss is having to come back and go, well, what does this mean? I don't understand that. It can limit that back and forth and allow you to be more productive. And finally, when you're not in the room and things are being discussed, those types of communications can be very helpful as an anchor to advocate for the work that needs to be done, the investment in your team, or taking action on the analysis that you did such that the organization gets business value. And that is how you go from code to canvas, and that is part of the art of leading data analytics teams. So with that, I thank you for your time. I saw a lot of comments in the chat already, so thank you for that. And then I'll just, I guess, open up to questions. Is that right, Katrina?
Yes, absolutely. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. Either way is completely fine.
So as we're waiting, I recognize that some of you in the audience are considering school, right? And so maybe you're thinking about this from your current context and what you might learn at the iSchool. Well, this type of knowledge is something that we infuse here at Illinois. Our faculty not only are pure scholars and practitioners, but some of them also have a lot of industry experience. I came from industry. And so as you think about moving your career forward, be thinking about not only the pure theory and the technical skills, but how are you translating that into the jobs that you're seeking? Okay. Do you want to become a data scientist? Do you want to become a data analyst? Are you wanting to work in a library? Is it something in between? Is it a job that frankly doesn't exist yet, right? Just be thinking about some of those things and what school might be a good fit for you, right? We want you obviously to come to Illinois, but all the schools are great and all the schools are going to get you ready. But I talk about that from a fit perspective, what fits best for you. And so just something to consider, because I'm 2 years out of defending my dissertation, and it was something that I thought about a lot, not just who I'd be working with, but what was a really good fit for me to thrive in what I wanted to accomplish and the goals that I wanted to achieve by going back to school. So anyway, just some additional context as we kick this conference off in the future of information sciences.
Well, we have a couple of questions dropping into the chat. What kinds of careers from your perspective, David, would a degree in information sciences offer up to people?
So that's a great question. I have been fortunate that I have met alumni from the iSchool that are 20 years out, as well as recently, and they've had jobs in consulting, for example, companies like Boston Consulting Group, all the way to running digital platforms in large organizations and everything in between. I have seen alumni go into philanthropy. I have seen alumni go into gift giving, um, libraries, like the opportunities are endless. A lot of the training and the foundation, I think, is really applicable to pretty much any job that you go into. And so I would put it back on you of what are you interested in? Like really be honest with yourself. What are you excited about? Right? This goes back to some of those assessments that I shared with you. What's your tendency? Right? What does that look like? What that what will that indicate to you of where you might be successful? And so that would be my suggestion for you. But I'm sure that Katrina could provide where students have gone and the companies. But that would be my suggestion to you, given that literally I was in your shoes 2 years ago.
Absolutely. So if you're curious about where some of the alum of Illinois have gone on to, we do have all that information public on our website. You just I know you may, those attending may not have been to our website before, but there's a tab that says our school and then data. You can always feel free to email us and we're happy to send you that way. With information sciences being such an interdisciplinary field, there really are just so many different areas that you can go into. And I see Tara drop that link in the chat. Thanks, Tara. So dovetailing on, there are so many different avenues you can take with an information sciences degree. If you find yourself in a data science role or you're leading one of these teams, you'd be communicating with people who speak the language of data as well as non-technical stakeholders. So David, do you have any top tips for when you are communicating with people of varying technical abilities?
Yeah. So this may sound a little funny, but one of the best pieces of advice I got was pretend they're a 5-year-old. And again, I recognize some of you may be chuckling, but what that really helped me remember is keeping it simple. Okay. And the simplicity, regardless of whether the person works in finance, marketing, HR, external partner, if they want to ask more questions, they will. But how do you set it up in a very, very simple way? Surprisingly enough, it's actually really hard to keep it simple, right? Because again, all the cool, like technical stuff that we do, right? That you really want people to know. But remember, it's about them receiving what you're sharing. And so my advice is keeping it as simple as possible and relating it to what they care about. And starting there will be the beginnings of a really great dialogue and conversation that you want to get to with that person.
That's great advice. I know when we get passionate about something, we want to share everything. But that's something that I'll try to remember too, because I find myself in that situation. So thank you to the person who asked that question. I do not see any other questions in the chat box. And we are at the top of the hour, so want to be cognizant in case you're hopping off to the next presenter at 11 a.m. Central. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you, Dr. Charles, for volunteering your time today for INFOcon 2024.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.